an external fertilization, the zygote has to be protected because a lot of environmental fluctuations tend to occur in an external medium. Process of development of embryo from the zygote is called as embryogenesis. So what is syngamy? Syngamy is nothing but the male gamete will move towards the female gamete and it will fuse with the female gamete. Most of the aquatic organisms that are there, they exhibit syngamy. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the last session of chapter 1 of 2nd PUC, that is Reproduction in Organisms. I am Dr. Divya, Biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about the pre-fertilization event wherein we studied about the gametogenesis and the gamete transfer. In today's session, let us discuss about the fertilization and the post-fertilization events. So to begin with, let us start with studying about the fertilization. So after the pre-fertilization, that is before fertilization, we understood the formation of the gametes had occurred, wherein there was, in some organisms, they produce homogametes, some organisms, they produce heterogametes, and these gametes, how do they move from one organism to the other? That is, the male gamete will usually be motile, whereas the female gamete will be stationary. And in some of the organisms such as the fungi, the algae and all that, in that both the male and the female gametes are motile, wherein they come to a point and they fertilize or fuse together. So now we had understood so much. Now when the male and the female gamete meets, that process is called as fertilization. What exactly happens in fertilization, we shall look into. So in this stage, the male and the female gamete, they come together to fuse, and this particular process is called as syngamy. So what happens during fertilization? Syngamy occurs. So what is syngamy? Syngamy is nothing but the male gamete will move towards the female gamete and it will fuse with the female gamete. For example, talking of human beings, the sperm, which is the male gamete, it will swim towards the female gamete, which is the ova or the egg, and it will fuse with it. That particular process is fertilization, and in other terms, we can call it as syngamy. So syngamy finally, that is the fusion of the male gamete with the female gamete, finally results in the formation of a zygote. So it will develop into a zygote. That zygote later on, it gets developed into an embryo, and the embryo into a fetus, and further developments will start to occur. So in some organisms like rotifers, in honeybees, and in some lizards, and also in few of the birds, the female gamete will undergo development to form new organism without fertilization. So this is a peculiar characteristic, right? So there are some organisms which do not undergo fertilization. So without the process of fertilization, they can produce the newborns. So some best examples that we can take of is organisms like the rotifers, the honeybees, some lizards and few of the birds. So without the male gamete fusing with the female gamete itself, the progenies can be produced. So therefore, the development of new organisms without the fusion of the male and the female gamete or without fertilization is called as parthenogenesis. So what is parthenogenesis? Without fertilization, the formation of a new offspring. And parthenogenesis can be seen in some of the plants as well, wherein the seeds are set without fertilization, or in turn we can call it as the seedless fruits. So they are nothing but the parthenocarps or the parthenogenesis. So this was about fertilization. So now exactly let us understand where does this syngamy occur, or where does the fertilization occur, or where exactly does the male gamete fuse with the female gamete. So syngamy occurs in external medium. So syngamy can either be external or it can be internal. Sometimes what happens is some of the organisms, they lay their eggs outside, and then in that particular eggs the fertilization will occur and then it will develop into young ones. In some of the organisms, inside the mother itself the fertilization will occur, wherein the male gamete will fuse with the female gamete to produce the newborn or the baby inside the mother's womb itself. So therefore, syngamy can be either external or it can be an internal medium. So syngamy occurs in the external medium, that is outside the body of the organism. Most of the aquatic organisms that are there, they exhibit syngamy. The best example that we can take of is algae. Then we can consider fishes and amphibians. So all these, you might have seen the frogs, right? Frogs, they lay some jelly-like eggs outside. So it is not fertilized. Later on, the male will fertilize it. Then only the development of the organism will take place and the eggs will hatch and the tadpoles will come out. So that is how it occurs. Even in fishes also, the fertilization is external. So syngamy can also be internal. That is, it can occur inside the body of the organism, and especially in many of the terrestrial organisms, the fertilization is internal. That is, syngamy is internal. So, syngamy is therefore of two types, that is external fertilization and internal fertilization. So, external fertilization means fertilization occurring outside the body of the organism, and internal fertilization is fertilization occurring inside the body of the organism. So let's look into these one by one. So external fertilization. So the fusion of the gamete usually occurs outside the body of the organism in an external medium such as water. I told you external syngamy or external fertilization is usually seen in aquatic organisms. Example, the algae, some fishes and the amphibians. So I gave the example of a frog, right? Not just that, even fishes also, the fertilization is external. Here, females will lay the eggs. So, eggs are what? They are the female gametes. It will be laid in the water, under the leaf surface or any safe places, under the rocks or wherever there is a safe place in the crevices and all, they will lay it in the water. And finally, the male will release the sperm, or it will release its male gametes, which will go and fertilize it. So, therefore, fertilization is external. And we need to know that one of the best characteristic of external fertilization is those organisms that exhibit external fertilization, they produce numerous amounts of egg. Why? Because external fertilization is always dependent on nature. There is 50-50% of chances, because the predators might come and feed on the egg. Frog has laid the egg there, it might come and feed on it, therefore killing a lot of the future offsprings that could have been produced, right? So therefore, to avoid that, nature has given such organisms a boon in such a way that these organisms lay thousands together of eggs. So hardly if some predator comes and eats some 50 or eat some 900 eggs also, if it eat, at least 100 will be remaining, no? So that the next generation can be produced. So that is one of the characteristic of the external fertilization. Next, talking about internal fertilization. So internal fertilization here, the fusion of the gametes, that is the male and the female gametes, will take place inside the body of the organism. The best example that we can take of is the terrestrial organism. And internal fertilization and those organisms that exhibit internal fertilization, say for example mammals, the best example that we can take of is we human beings, right? Do we produce thousands of eggs? No, only one egg get produced in the female, but male gametes will be produced in thousands. But the female gamete will be produced only one. Why? Because the fertilization is taking place inside the body of the organism. Therefore, the chances of a predator getting into our body and feeding on it is not at all possible, right? So, therefore, the whatever progeny is formed can be safeguarded very easily. So, that is why the organism is exhibiting internal fertilization, they will not produce thousands of egg, when compared to that of those organisms which reproduce by external fertilization. So these are the two main differences between external fertilization and internal fertilization. This is one important question that usually keeps repeating for the exams. Next, moving further, so now we have understood about fertilization. What happens in the fertilization? Where does fertilization occur? So fertilization can occur in water, that is in an external medium, and it can occur in an internal medium, that is in the body of an organism itself. So that we understood. Now since we know how the fertilization occurs, we shall move into post-fertilization events, that is after fertilization occurring, what exactly takes place, how exactly the progeny develops or the offspring develops, we shall look into. So the fertilization events that occur after the formation of the zygote. So how was the zygote formed? The zygote was formed during the process of fertilization, wherein the syngamy or the fusion of the male and the female gamete took place, eventually forming the zygote, right? So now once the zygote is formed, or after the zygote is formed, it is all the events that occur come under the post-fertilization event. So the fusion of the gametes, the formation of zygote, all comes under fertilization events. After the formation of zygote, whatever events will come, they all are under the post-fertilization events. So under post-fertilization events, there are two steps that are there, two events occur. One is the formation of the zygote and the other one is the development of the embryo or the embryogenesis. So let us study about these one by one. The first event that occurs in the post-fertilization event is the formation of the zygote. So in organisms where the fertilization is external, that is where the fusion of the male gamete with the female gamete occurs in an external medium such as the water, the zygote is formed in the external medium itself, that is in the water itself, the zygote development will occur. Say for example, we had taken the example of frog. The female frog will lay its egg, right? It is the female gamete into the water. Now in the water, wherever the eggs are there, the male will release its sperm, which is the male gamete, that will go and fuse with the egg. Fertilization will occur, resulting in the formation of the zygote. So therefore, where is a zygote being formed in an external fertilization? Outside the body of the organism in an external medium, for example, water, right? So, but in the case of internal fertilization, the sperm will be delivered into the body of the female, wherein the sperm will travel towards the egg or the ova and it will fuse there. There itself, the development of the embryo will take place, so the formation of the zygote will occur. Therefore, if it is an internal fertilization, the internal zygote is formed inside the body of the organism, and the development of the zygote depends on what type of life cycle and what type of environment the organism is in. Say for example, in fungi. So in fungi and algae, the fertilization is external. So when it is an external fertilization, the zygote has to be protected because a lot of environmental fluctuations tend to occur in an external medium. For example, water. The temperatures might change, the salinity, the pH, whatever it is, everything might change of the water, right? So whatever might happen in the external medium, the zygote has to be protected very, very well. So in such cases, in organisms which have external fertilization such as the fungi, the algae and all, a thick wall gets formed around the zygote. So this thick wall is the one that actually protects the zygote from the desiccation. Say for example, okay, because of some reason the water level in the water body drastically reduced or the water body dried up. Now what might happen to the zygote that has formed externally? What can we do, right? What can nature do? Either it has to rain. So until it rains, the zygote has to be protected, right? Or else what will happen? Because the zygote might completely dry up and it will die, right? So for that particular reason, what happens? The zygote gets covered with a very thick wall, so that if the thick wall is present, it will prevent the loss of water. So when loss of water is prevented, then desiccation is also prevented. So it will it will protect the zygote from the desiccation damage when the fungi and the algae are at a resting period. That is, when they are at a dormant stage. So what do we mean by dormant stage? Whenever there is an unfavorable condition, a particular organism fails to develop, so that it can go into an inactive or a resting stage and protect itself until favorable conditions attain. So here also same thing, until when the wall will be there, the thick wall will be there, it will be there until the dormant period. Once the dormant period or unfavorable condition passes, then these walls vanishes and they start to develop into new organisms. So that is how it actually occurs. So formation of zygote in an external medium requires a lot of adaptive features here. In organisms having haplontic life cycle, the zygote usually divides by meiosis to form haploid spores. So these haploid spores usually grow into individuals. Now what happens here? Okay, so the walls are there. So whenever there is some dry conditions and all that, or in a dormant stage, the walls will be intact as such, protecting the zygote from desiccation. When favorable conditions attain back, the zygote will further divide by a process called as meiosis, which is nothing but equational division, and they produce haploid spores. So these haploid spores, they spurt out of the zygote and they develop into new individuals in the case of fungi and algae. So that is how fungi and algae in an external medium, they are capable of surviving by the formation of thick wall around the zygote. Next process is, now we understood how zygote formation occurs. So how in humans, how zygote formation occurs, we shall study in a chapter, human reproduction, where everything is explained there. So for now we just wanted to understand, because human reproduction, it is internal fertilization, right? So that we can study in the coming chapters. But what about external fertilization? There is no other chapter that explains that in your PU textbook. So that is why we have explained it here. So next, talking about the next step, embryogenesis. So now we understood, okay, in an external fertilization, the spores develop. Those spores are the ones that develop into further organisms. Now, what happens once the zygote formation occurs and the zygote development takes place? It gives rise to the formation of embryo or the development of embryo. That particular process is called as embryogenesis. So the process of development of embryo from the zygote is called as embryogenesis. And during embryogenesis, the zygote usually undergoes mitotic cell division. Why mitotic cell division? It's because they should have certain set of chromosomes, right? So that is why from the gametes, the chromosome should have increased in the offspring. So that is the reason why they undergo mitotic cell division, which is nothing but equational cell division. So that, say for example, in humans, if 46 chromosomes need to be carried, the embryo also needs to have 46 chromosomes, then it needs to undergo mitotic division, that is equational division. And later on, they undergo differentiation. So based on the embryonic development, the animals are grouped into two types. One is oviparous animals and the other one is viviparous animals. So what are these? We shall look into. So oviparous animals. So oviparous animals are the animals that actually give rise to young ones by laying eggs. So they are called as oviparous. So the best example is birds, some of the reptiles, right? They are oviparous. So these are the animals which lay fertilized and unfertilized eggs. So fertilized eggs means, they lay fertilized eggs means the fertilization is internal. If they lay unfertilized eggs means the fertilization is taking place external. So therefore they lay both fertilized and unfertilized eggs, and the fertilized eggs are usually covered by hard calcareous shells. So unfertilized eggs, are they covered by calcareous shells? No. Why aren't they covered by calcareous shells? Because unfertilized eggs, for example in frogs lay unfertilized eggs, right? The eggs will be somewhat slimy and slushy and all that, jelly-like, and it will be laid into the water. Why it will be jelly-like is to camouflage with the surrounding water medium. That is one of the reasons. Other reason is the sperm will have to penetrate and fertilize it outside, right? So that is the reason. But in the case of fertilized egg, the egg would have already been fertilized inside the body of the organism itself, and then it will be laid to an external environment. So that egg has to be protected now. So that is why they develop a hard calcareous shell, and the eggs are laid in a very, very safe place, and after a period of incubation, the eggs hatch and the young ones come out. So they need a certain temperature for a certain period of time, which is called as the incubation period, for the eggs to hatch and then the young ones come out. So therefore, the development of the young ones from a fertilized egg, it is nothing but oviparous kind of development. Next, talking about viviparous. So in viviparous, these are the animals which give birth to young ones. They don't lay egg, but they directly give birth to a young one. And then the zygote that develops into the young one will take place inside the body of the female organism. So every developmental process will take place inside the body of the females itself in the case of viviparous. So mammals are best example for viviparous organisms, and after they reach a certain stage of growth, the young ones are delivered by the female. That is parturition process, all that will occur, which you will study in human reproduction chapter, which is very interesting. So in that chapter you will study about all of these. So most of the mammals, so all the mammals, they exhibit viviparous type of embryogenic development, wherein the development of the embryo, the formation of the fetus, everything takes place inside the body of the female itself. So that is viviparous. So next, talking about the flowering plants. So we understood about animals now. In animals, they have oviparous and viviparous forms of embryogenesis or the embryo development, right? What about in the case of plants? So in flowering plants, the zygote is formed inside the ovule. So we all know the parts of a flower, right? So inside the gynoecium, what is there? So this is the ovary part. In the ovary, what is there? Ovule is there. So inside the ovule, what is there? Inside the ovule, there is presence of the embryo sac, and it is in the embryo sac that the fertilization actually takes place. So in morphology of the flowering plants, that particular chapter, all this has been explained in detail. The flower usually consists of the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and all these, once the fertilization occurs, all these will fall off. So we know, right, the different parts of the flower, all these will fall off, but only the female reproductive part will remain. Why? Because it is in the ovule actually the fertilization process or the embryo development is occurring. So that is the reason why. So all these parts of the flower will wither or fall off after fertilization, but the female reproductive part, that is the gynoecium part that is there, this entire part only will remain in the flower and it remains attached to the plant. So the zygote develops into the embryo and the ovules develop into the seed. So whatever zygote is there, that develops into the embryo. So inside the embryo sac, the egg cell fusion will occur, wherein the fertilization process, it is a double fertilization or it is a triple SYNGAMY process. So all that will occur, which you will study in the next coming chapters, and therefore the ovary that is there, it will develop into the fruits. Zygote develops into the embryo, the ovules will develop into the seed, and the ovary part, that is the entire external part, that will develop into the fruit. So that is how embryo development takes place in the case of flowering plants. Finally, the fruit will develop. So fruit, what forms into fruit? I told you the ovary part that is there will develop into the fruit. So the fruit develops a thick wall around itself, which is called as the pericarp. So as you can see, the fruit, around the fruit, a thick wall is developed. This is called as the pericarp. And this is the seed that is developed. So what developed into the seed? The ovules, right? So, and this pericarp, it plays a very important role in protection. And after the dispersal of the seeds germinate under favorable condition. to produce a new plant. Therefore, the flowering plant enters into its next generation. So, therefore, seed is the main reproductive structure of the plant that actually helps in continuing the life cycle of the plant or helping the plant to move on into the next. So, this was about the formation of embryo in the case of flowering plant. So, with this, the particular chapter, that is reproduction in organism, comes to an end. So, I hope you understood the session as well as the whole chapter. So, we shall meet again in the coming sessions with a new chapter. Thank you.